Everyone's known from day one that Bryan Kohberger was guilty. His DNA was literally at the scene, and his car was seen going around and around the house before the murders. So why is it that the prosecution would offer a plea deal? It was a slam dunk. Everyone said so. Again, his freaking DNA was found at the scene. So one has to ask, why would the prosecution ever offer a plea deal if they know that there's no way Bryan Kohberger can get away with this? Here are the top 5 reasons why I believe Bill Thompson may have changed and offered a plea deal on a situation that's supposed to be a slam dunk. Coming in at number 5 is like my other video on Bryan Kohberger's top 5 reasons why he accepted the plea deal, and that is the witness protection angle. The appointment of Joshua Hurwitz, U.S. Attorney, District Attorney, last minute in this case in April basically could be the precursor for why the plea deal came in place. When the U.S. District Attorney comes and gets involved in the prosecution side last minute, and then a plea deal is arranged last minute, it indicates the possibility of some kind of pressure by the U.S. government. There was indications, again, that Bryan Kohberger could be involved in some kind of witness protection scenario. The fact that federal marshals were all over the courthouse. And again, there is reasons why federal marshals could be in a courthouse other than witness protection. But one of the jobs of federal marshals is to protect people in witness protection. If there was a larger fish to fry in this case, such as a drug ring, a drug cartel, some kind of larger criminal conspiracy, and Bryan Kohberger has information perhaps that is helpful to the federal government on a much larger fish than himself, then it's possible the U.S. government could be actually protecting Bryan Kohberger and saying, look, we'll make a deal with you. We'll take off an open and shut case against you and just give you life in prison for your involvement in it in exchange for helping us bring down a bigger fish. In fact, there's a possibility Bryan Kohberger might not have done it at all. And they would say, if you take the plea for it and help us take down the bigger fish, then we'll cut you loose later on outside the, when all this is said and done and nobody's looking. Now, again, that's number 5 at the list. It's least likely for me, but it's certainly on the table. There was an involvement of federal marshals. Take a look at my other video on the top 5 reasons why Bryan Kohberger changed his plea at the last minute and the scenario there involving federal marshals. There's a possibility Joshua Hurwitz being inserted into this case in April of 2025 is the reason why. And don't forget, by the way, the document Bryan Kohberger signed was supposedly signed June 1st and then crossed out and wrote July on top of it without even initialing that the date had changed. Was the deal done in June? Did Hurwitz come in April, and within a couple of months in June, that plea deal was brokered behind the scene in June, and then later on kind of held in the background and changed to July because there was still stuff in the work. There's indications that Joshua Hurwitz inserting into this case last minute is part of the reason why the plea deal came. All right. Coming in at number 4 is the idea that a last-minute witness or an important witness for the state's prosecution fell through. This is a primary person that was of interest for me, which is Molly McMichaels, I believe it is. And Molly McMichaels is the DoorDash driver who claimed, according to the arrest videos that we've seen where she's in the station and she says, yeah, apparently I have to testify against Bryan Kohberger. I'm the DoorDash driver. I was there that night. I saw him. This was a surprise to many people, including, even more surprising, is when on camera she tells a police officer, yeah, I'm friends with Bill Thompson. Did Bill Thompson, the prosecution, have a relationship with Molly from the past? Absolutely. Molly's husband was shot and killed. Bill Thompson actually represented Molly for a period of time against the person who shot and killed her husband. That's a long story and it happened well before, but there is an established relationship between Molly and Bill Thompson. Molly also was well known by the police officers in this case. When the case was largely circumstantial and for 2.5 years we heard nothing about Molly testifying against Bryan Kohberger, suddenly just before trial we see a video come out where Molly is going to be a surprise witness and testify against Bryan Kohberger. The reason would be, in this logic, is that even with all their circumstantial evidence, they couldn't place Bryan Kohberger in the house. In fact, Bill Thompson said from the stand at the plea hearing, while we can't definitively put Bryan Kohberger in the house, we can put his phone near the house. That was Bill Thompson's almost exact words. We can't definitively put Bryan Kohberger in the house, but we can put his phone near the house. I believe that there was a strong possibility Molly McMichaels was going to be a witness that was going to try to place Bryan Kohberger at the house. But that fell through when videos came out of her talking about how she's friends with Bill Thompson. Did the prosecution put pressure on Molly last minute to get that nail in the coffin against Kohberger? Not only do we have all this circumstantial evidence, we have somebody who saw you go into the house, and that was the plan. And when Molly's basically credibility got stomped all over because her previous arrests on drugs, her previous engagements in suspicious activity, her bragging about how she's friends with Bill Thompson, completely ruined that witness, and it was going to be shot. And therefore their last ditch effort to make a 100% we can place him at the house just went out the window. And therefore they thought, damn it, all we're left is with a circumstantial case. Take the fucking plea deal and get out of this thing with the win. Coming in at number 3 is basically the idea that the prosecution could not stop exculpatory information from being put into the court system. Now, this is primarily, in my theory, Bethany Funk. Again, Ann Taylor submitted a request saying that Bethany Funk had exculpatory information. What is exculpatory information? Exculpatory information means she has information. Bethany Funk, according to Ann Taylor, has information that would prove that her client couldn't have done it, or at least cast massive amounts of doubt. This exculpatory evidence is something that Ann Taylor had fought to get Bethany Funk to testify on the stand. Bethany Funk was fighting that. I believe there's every indication, especially from Howard Bloom's book, When the Night Comes Falling, that Bethany Funk was being protected by the feds. She had been moved out of the state, and she was being coached and protected by the feds to make sure that she had every reason to fight being subpoenaed and brought back into the state of Idaho to testify in Bryan Kohberger's case. Why? Because Bethany Funk allegedly saw someone at the back of the house putting clothes into a garbage bag and leaving in their underwear. If the person that Bethany Funk saw, for example, if those rumors were true, and there's good reason to believe that they were, if those rumors were true and Bethany saw somebody at the back of the house in underwear leaving, and if that person wasn't Bryan Kohberger, that changes everything. And if Ann Taylor knew that that's what Bethany Funk would have to say if she was subpoenaed, and she's fighting the subpoena, then here's the question. Did the prosecution lose that battle? Was it going to be forced that Bethany Funk was going to get subpoenaed, that she couldn't fight despite all the protections that she had to keep her off the stand? Was Bethany Funk going to be forced to go and testify on the stand and possibly say the words, by the way, I saw a bald man, a 5'6" man, a black man, whatever the case may be, something that would be exculpatory to Bryan Kohberger, meaning it wasn't Bryan Kohberger that they saw in the house leaving in underwear that night. If that was coming out at last second, that they couldn't keep somebody that was going to come forward with exculpatory information proving Bryan Kohberger either couldn't have been the person or certainly didn't do it alone, as they say, then that would be another reason to say, fuck it, take the plea deal, get out of this thing right away, because we can't keep that person from being subpoenaed and forced to testify and blow our entire case. Coming in at number 2 is, of course, just the obvious. The case was massively circumstantial. Because it was massively circumstantial, we don't know, for example, suspect vehicle 1 definitively is Bryan Kohberger's vehicle. Despite them saying in the PCA that they observed that it had no front license plate, it was admitted under oath by Corporal Payne, the officer, that no, they didn't actually observe that the vehicle didn't have a front license plate. That was something they found out about Bryan Kohberger by the FBI when they got a tip about Bryan Kohberger, and then found that he had drove a car without a front license plate. And then they back wrote into the working document, the probable cause affidavit, that they noted it didn't have a front license plate. That was admitted under oath, and many people seem to forget that. They still think to this day that the PCA does say, and this part's true, that the vehicle was observed without a license plate. What they don't seem to realize is that under oath, Ann Taylor got them to admit that it was not true, that the PCA, the probable cause affidavit that the judge signed off on, in part because they observed that the vehicle arriving at the scene had no front license plate. That was untrue. Corporal Payne admitted under oath that they didn't know and they didn't see that the vehicle didn't have a front license plate. That was something they learned later on and wrote into the PCA, and a judge signed off on it as if it was a known fact. It was not known. So again, highly circumstantial case, and therefore there was a probability, not a probability, a strong possibility that the prosecution could lose this case. It is almost entirely circumstantial. Even the DNA evidence, which is the slam dunk, the prosecution admitted that they weren't planning on bringing in the IgG information, the investigative genealogy, genetic genealogy report on how they developed the profile to Bryan Kohberger. They were not even going to use that in court because they thought they had a strong enough case without it. Why would they not use it if that's the smoking gun proof that Bryan Kohberger was at the house, the little speck of DNA that they say was definitively single source touch DNA by Bryan Kohberger? If that was the smoking gun, why did the prosecution admit that they weren't even planning on bringing that into the court? It makes you wonder how strong that case really was, and they knew there was a problem. They had broken some rules in order to get Bryan Kohberger at the scene, and they didn't want to have that in their day in court. So if all of that stuff, all the circumstantial evidence led to the possibility that they might actually lose this case, and Bill Thompson's doing his last case before he retires, then again, maybe a plea deal was a way to get a win for everybody. It's a largely circumstantial case. There's a possibility we're going to lose this thing. Get out of the case, make a plea deal, take the win. And again, coming in at number 1, and it's much like number 2, but I feel like it deserves its own thing. There was a strong possibility. The only reason why the prosecution would offer a deal is that there was a strong possibility they were going to lose. And that's the important part that you have to understand. If, as everyone in America wants to say, this was an open and shut case, everybody knows Bryan Kohberger did it. And of course, now you know he did it because he confessed to it. If that's the case, and everyone knows he was going down for it because there was no question it was his vehicle at the scene, there was no question it was his DNA at the scene, there's no question somebody saw him at the house. If all those things were really true, there is no way in hell Bill Thompson is offering a plea deal and letting a murderer get away with something that they know he did and they can prove in a court of law. The fact that the prosecution offered a plea deal, and again, keep in mind, the defense can't do this on their own. The prosecution had to offer the plea deal. Why in God's name do you think the prosecution offered a plea deal if they had an open and shut case? They did not have an open and shut case. They knew there was a strong possibility they could lose that case. And it was better to take a plea deal, the guaranteed win, than to risk losing it. And that cannot be overstated. No way in hell would Bill Thompson offer a plea deal if it was that much of a slam dunk. And so the fact that they offered it means to me that the prosecution had a hole in their theory. They were afraid that if it went to a jury of Bryan Kohberger's peers, that if it went to a jury, they might actually find that there's not good evidence and that Bryan Kohberger could have walked. That's the only reason for the last minute plea deal. So at the end of the day, those are the top 5 reasons. Ultimately, the top 5 reason is the reason the deal was offered is because there was a possibility they were going to lose that case.